Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to a brand new legal breaking reporting. Kilmar Abugo Garcia's wrongful deportation case is not just about one man, but it is also about individual rights. Let's get into this brand new reporting that was just released by The Conversation. The article, ladies and gentlemen, is titled Kilmar Abrigo Garcia's Wrongful Deportation Cases, More About Individual Rights Than the Trump Administration's Foreign Policy. And ladies and gentlemen, the article reads, Trump administration officials have repeatedly claimed that judges who order the administration to take action to bring deported Venezuelans back from the El Salvadorian prison where the U.S. sent them are meddling in the conduct of foreign policy. Quote, the foreign policy of the United States is conducted by the President Donald J. Trump, not by a court, and no court in the United States has a right to conduct the foreign policy of the United States, unquote, Secretary of State Marco Rubio said on April 14. Well, I've got news for you, Marco Rubio. You obviously do not know what the hell you are talking about. I say this because the courts are not meddling in any foreign policy. How do I know that? Because Vice President of El Salvador, Felix Ulloa, ULLOA, said to Maryland Democratic Senator Chris Van Hollen that the case is in the United States' hands. In other words, the ball is in the United States hands, in courts. And that El Salvador cannot do anything until the court issue is resolved here in the United States. So, Marco Rubio, you don't know what the hell you're talking about. Shut the hell up, you uneducated swine. Fucking sleazebag. Continuing with the article, ladies and gentlemen. His comments refer to cases including that of Kilmar Abrigo Garcia, a 29-year-old Salvadorian man who was deported to El Salvador on March 15, 2025, without any due process The Trump administration says it will not bring him back to the United States despite a Supreme Court order to facilitate his return. A reporter on April 30 asked Rubio about whether he has been in touch with El Salvador regarding Abrigo Garcia. Abrigo Garcia's potential release from a maximum security prison there. Quote, "Well, I would never tell you that, and you know who else I would never tell? A judge, because the conduct of our foreign policy belongs to the president," unquote, Rubio said. Rubio, you don't know what the hell you're talking about. You're uneducated, for two, and for three, you don't even belong in the government, or even in a government position, if that. Continuing with the article, ladies and gentlemen. Rubio made a similar point on April 14, posting on X, quote, "No court in the United States has a right to conduct the foreign policy of the United States. It's that simple. End of story," unquote. Again, Rubio, you uneducated idiot. The courts are not meddling, as you so proclaim. There's no evidence either that they're meddling with foreign policy. You're just saying that because that's what you do, is you continuously lie. You and the rest of the corrupt, illegal, unconstitutional, unlawful Trump administration. All you guys do is lie. Continuing with the article. The legal cases of Abrigo Garcia and other non-citizens deported to El Salvador are far from simple. Chinese Keatner, a scholar, Shimeen Keatler, a scholar of international law and civil litigation, answers a few key questions about the power that U.S. judges actually have in these wrongful deportation cases. Ladies and gentlemen, are these cases really about foreign policy? We're about to find that out. These wrongful deportation cases aren't similarly primarily about foreign policy. Despite what Trump officials have said, they're about the protection of individual rights, including the right to due process. The Trump administration is arguing that courts cannot grant relief to individuals challenging their deportation and detention if those individuals are sent to another country and imprisoned there. Under that argument, even a wrongfully detained and deported U.S. citizen would be out of luck. That can't, in my understanding, be right. In Reed v. Covert, a foundational case from 1957, the Supreme Court made clear that the government cannot deprive U.S. citizens of due process by entering into an agreement with a foreign country. Now, non-citizens are being detained in El Salvador under agreements including between Rubio and Salvadorian President Nayib Bukele in February 2025. So far, the relevant agreements have not been disclosed to Congress, arguably in violation of U.S. law. They also have not been disclosed to courts that have sought answers about relevant details. Following an April trip to El Salvador, U.S. Senator Chris Van Hollen, a Democrat from Maryland, said that the U.S. will pay El Salvador $15 million to imprison the deported non-citizens, and that El Salvador is imprisoning these men only because the U.S. is paying for it. Ladies and gentlemen, what are other important elements to understand about these cases? We're about to find that out. The Trump administration is arguing that a judge or the Supreme Court cannot order it to return non-citizens to the United States because detention operations in El Salvador, a foreign country, are beyond the reach of the U.S. courts. That is a lie, ladies and gentlemen, right there. Donald Trump and his illegal, unconstitutional regime are continuously lying, and I'm sick of it. Continuing with the article. However, the U.S. decision to arrest, detain, and deport non-citizens to El Salvador and to pay for their incarceration there with U.S. taxpayer dollars are not foreign policy decisions that cannot be reviewed by any judge. They are, I would argue, governmental deprivations of the individual rights to due process. A U.S. court does not have power, does not have power over the government of El Salvador. However, it can order the U.S. government to request an individual's return. The Supreme Court has ordered the government to facilitate the return of Abrigo Garcia. The government has argued that facilitate in this context simply requires removing domestic U.S. legal obstacles. However, given that Abrigo Garcia is being detained in El Salvador, any effective remedy would require the U.S. government to request his return under the detention between the two countries. Another federal judge made this clear in an April order requiring the government to make a good faith request to El Salvador to release a different wrongfully deported 20-year-old. Meanwhile, Trump has stated that his administration is exploring the idea of extending the El Salvador detention agreement to encompass U.S. citizens. Judges have already expressed concern that U.S. citizens, including children, are being removed from the country, quote, without no meaningful process, unquote. These actions cannot be shielded from judicial review on the grounds that they involve foreign policy. This is frankly quite irritating and dangerous, ladies and gentlemen, because by law, U.S. citizens cannot be deported whatsoever. We are in some definitely hard times because of this unconstitutional, illegal criminal administration. Can the Trump administration claim that judges can't rule on foreign policy? We're about to find that out. The Constitution gives foreign affairs powers to both the executive and legislative branches. Judges can't conduct foreign policy. They can, however, decide cases that may affect foreign policy, especially when individual rights are at stake. Another country's involvement in a case doesn't prevent U.S. courts from protecting individual rights. Ladies and gentlemen, can these court orders requiring the return of wrongfully deported individuals be enforced? We're about to find that out. The Trump administration is currently trying to portray judges as spreading quote, lawlessness, unquote, with these court orders, in the words of Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller. But I would argue that the opposite is true. If the White House disagrees with an order by a district court or court of appeals, it can seek review by the Supreme Court. Meanwhile, it is obliged to obey lower court orders absent a stay or pause of their implementation. However, ladies and gentlemen, they are just not obeying the courts illegally and unconstitutionally. Continuing with the article. Courts can do their part to reject claims that the executive branch is entitled to act without worded orders and even holding officials in contempt. At the end of the day, however, only Congress is empowered to remove a president who refuses to comply with the law. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it for today's legal breaking reporting on the side of politics in the case regarding Edgar Garcia. If you did enjoy this video, firstly, please like, comment, share, subscribe. Secondly, if you want to make sure that you're always up to date and in the know-how of what is going on the side of politics between these constant court, rightful, legal, constitutional, lawful, legal battles, please, hit the bell icon and click the all notifications option. The bell icon is located right next to the subscribe button down below the screen here, directly on the right hand side of the subscribe button. Thirdly, ladies and gentlemen, if you guys would also like to stay up to date and in the know-how of what is going on the side of politics and these constant back and forth, unfortunate court battles with the Trump administration and regime, please follow me on my social medias. There I will be posting when I've uploaded brand new legal breaking reporting analysis videos on the side of politics to the YouTube channel. Fourthly, ladies and gentlemen, please stay positive, stay safe, and know that justice will prevail on the correct side of the law. Despite Donald Trump and his illegal, unconstitutional regimes, illegal, unconstitutional executive orders and actions, I am on Instagram, Snapchat, Threads, as well as TikTok, ladies and gentlemen. I know that majority of you, including me, at times are losing hope But unfortunately, I think that's all we can do as of right now. And do whatever the heck we can to fight Donald Trump and his illegal, unconstitutional administration, as well as the Department of Justice. F you, Pam Bondi. F you, Kash Patel. F you, Marco Rubio. F you, Trump.